My name is Sherry Mallard. I brought in my grandfather's medals. The medals and artifacts were given to me by my mother. He had some pay books and lots of pictures and some documents from the war. She got them from her grandfather. They were given to my mother, and eventually they're coming to me.
Canadian valour in the First World War was unquestioned. Canadians held the line at Ypres as the Germans unleashed the first poison gas attack of the war. Canadians fought through the mud and blood-drenched battlefield at Passchendaele, and at Vimy Ridge, where the solemn and majestic Canadian National Vimy Memorial now stands. Many historians say Canadian soldiers helped forge our national identity. Those historic and heroic victories came at a cost. Canada had a population of less than 8 million in 1914, but over 650,000 Canadians served in the First World War. More than a quarter of them were wounded, and 1 in 10 died.
These items were my great-grandfather's from World War I. There's some pay books, pictures, and medals.
These are a standard set of World War I medals. This is the 1415 Star, the British War Medal, and the Victory Medal. You also have a patriotic flag here. This was actually a common piece during the First World War that you would bring to parades, welcoming troops home, or any kind of rallies. Here you have the pay books of your great-grandfather, Alfred Lloyd. And in this would be where all his pay information would be, and often you'll see it'll show different battles. This one's a later war version, so it doesn't have as much information, but still very nice to have it complete with the group. They're a standard set of medals, but the 1415 Star is really for those that qualified for it by being overseas earlier in the war, so 1914 to 1915. Your great-grandfather, I understood, joined up in 1914, which was very early. I think it was September of 1914.
Yes.
So quite early joiner, and that's why he's qualifying for this medal, which is the 1415 Star. His name, rank, and serial number are on the back, and on the other medals, it's actually on the edge. This actually goes back to the Victorian period, where Queen Victoria decided to honor British soldiers who served on campaign by giving them a medal that is named and inscribed to them and their regiment. So this started in 1837, and this continued up until the First World War. So that's why Commonwealth medals are all named and numbered to that individual. So right here we have a patriotic flag from the period, and you can see it's got all the flags of the different Commonwealth that were participating in the First World War. So missing the original wooden stick that would have been on. But yeah, very nice. It's like on an oilcloth. You also brought in a photograph of the brothers. And the entire family of brothers signed up to serve in the First World War. There was no prohibition against having siblings serving in the same regiment. I do have children, and I could say quite honestly that I would worry every second of the time that they're away. You said 2 had not survived?
Yes, 2 were killed in action.
Very, very symbolic of Canada's sacrifices in the First World War. Do you have any memories of your great-grandfather?
I was very young when he passed away, but I do remember that he was very hard of hearing.
As is typical for artillery troops,
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Man, I remember him going in the backyard and sitting by himself under a tree, and we weren't allowed to bother him, but very quiet.
And I understand that he also took a bride overseas?
He did, yes. My great-grandfather was actually born in England. His family immigrated to Montreal. And when he went back to the war, I guess he went back to the same neighborhood that he had lived in prior to. And my great-grandmother lived on that same street that he used to live on in England. And they ended up getting married, and he brought her to Montreal.
Well, as you can imagine, young Canadian soldiers going overseas, young people are young people, and of course, you have to remember, your average Canadian soldier was between 18, 17, 19 years old, or 20 years old, and going overseas and, finding love, amongst all the carnage. Alfred would have gone over in late 1914 and would have arrived in England in 1915 with the Battle of Vimy Ridge, which was basically a battle that was completely run by the Canadians. The Canadian Corps, as it was known, and 4 divisions of Canadians fought all together. Canada gave 620,000 personnel to the war effort. At the time, it was the thing to do, to join up and defend the Commonwealth. We took about 10% casualties during that war.
From my understanding, the two brothers that died in the war, they left behind widows with very young children. One was pregnant at the time, and I think the other one had two very young children. So it would have been hard, I think, for the brides at home.
You know, it's a tragedy, those 7 brothers that went over to fight, 2 didn't come home. You know, what would have happened had they come home? Their families wouldn't have been broken. And so that's, to me, when I look at something like that, that's what I think about. I really think about the cost of war. It really speaks to the sacrifice that Canada suffered due to the casualties involved in a war.
I did learn some things, and I'm very interested to go back and preserve this documents and keep them safe and hopefully for another 100 years.
So did you have any plans for this grouping?
Well, currently it's all sitting in a little box, and I would like to display it somehow.
Did you want to keep them in the family? I think that's great. You know, you appreciate your family's Canadian military history. What I would do personally is I would get these court-mounted and placed in a shadow box with the pay books put in there as well, and a reproduction picture, get a laser photocopy of the original picture. It's a grouping that belonged to an average Canadian that went over to defend England, but it really speaks to the sacrifice that Canada suffered due to the casualties involved in a war.
I would like to pass it down. I like to keep it as a collection and all together and not separate it. I hope one of my boys will want it.